So again, welcome to the COVID-19 and small and mid-sized meat processors call, exploring the challenges, solutions, and a path forward. I'm Annalena with the Wallace Center, and I'm part of the team coordinating the Food Systems Leadership Network and its COVID-19 listserv. Thank you so much for being here with us today to explore the challenges and emerging solutions around meat processing that supports many local and regional food systems. I'm joined today by my colleague and co-facilitator of the call, Pete Heff, who leads the Wallace Center's work to expand grass-based livestock production systems and value chains through the Pasture Project. We're also joined by 3 expert presenters who will be speaking more about their experiences and insights. Before we introduce the speakers, just a quick Zoom tech and call overview. As you can see, you're entering the call muted and with your video off. Please stay muted until the Q&A. But feel free to turn your video on. Always nice to see faces. And unlike previous Wallace Center calls that we've been hosting recently, we won't be going into small breakout group discussions today, but instead we're going to hear from our 3 presenters and then have around 15 or 20 minutes for the Q&A. So thank you to everyone who has submitted questions during the registration, and for those of you that haven't, please feel free to use the chat box to enter any questions that come up from you during the presentation. Wallace Center staff is on the line and they are capturing the questions in a document. We'll try to get to all of that during the Q&A. So that chat box to enter your question is just on the bottom of the toolbar there. We will also be taking notes and recording this call, and we'll share that out within 24 hours. So thanks for your patience with that. All right, so the call today emerged from a discussion on the Food Systems Leadership Network's COVID-19 listserv, which is a listserv dedicated to connecting food systems leaders from across the U.S. to share their challenges, strategies, and emerging solutions in response to COVID-19's impact on our sector. This thread in particular was the discussion addressing the longstanding challenges faced by small and mid-sized meat processors that have been highlighted and exacerbated by the pandemic. And that's been covered, and it's highly covered impact on large processors and packers. So through this conversation, folks were sharing issues that they were experiencing, solutions that they were using to support small and mid-sized processors, and ideas for policy change. So today we're going to be continuing that conversation and are so grateful to have with us Jessica Roosa of This Old Farm in Indiana, Rebecca Thistlethwaite from the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, and Kelly Nuckolls from National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. All 3 have agreed to share their expertise as our community works to understand the impact that COVID-19 is having on small and mid-sized processors and how they're adapting to these challenges, and the efforts that are underway that we can support to help alleviate pressure and ensure lasting change for these critical links in our food systems. So before we get started, we'd love to know just a little bit more about who's on the call today. So we're going to issue a quick poll just to get a sense of your role. So if you can just enter what response works best for you there. And I think I'm going to have to see if Elizabeth, also Wallace Center staff, is going to get the results. So maybe in a few seconds, how many people have responded? Do you have a good amount?
Yeah, some votes still coming in, but looks like we got a strong showing from nonprofit staff, about 35%. 13% of y'all coming from academia or research. We've got a strong showing also from processors, a couple folks from government, and several technical assistance providers.
Awesome.
And also about 8 or 10% of agricultural or livestock producers on the call.
Nice. Well, thanks everyone. That's it's helpful to know who's on the call and definitely helps the presenters craft a little bit more. Oh, and here are the results. There they are. So yeah, definitely good showing from nonprofit staff. All right, so with that, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Jessica Roosa of This Old Farm. Jessica, I know, started This Old Farm in 2001 as a diversified farm in Indiana, but after running into a bottleneck in the processing sector of the meat value chain, expanded her business to include a USDA certified organic processing facility and food hub that now serves a multi-state region. So Jessica, thank you so much for being with us today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Hopefully volume's okay. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that in the office we're just talking about all of the time, especially frustrating time to be in this business as a people pleaser, as somebody that's been dedicated to supporting farms for 10 years now as a processor, and all of a sudden having a capacity issue. So glad to be having the conversation here today. Background, yes, I started as a farmer. I started processing because as a farmer, I had problems getting a product to market. And so I serve as a processor dedicated to the niche market of direct farmers. So farmers marketing direct to consumer. And that's been my goal for the last 10 years. Also do some wholesale sales and sales on behalf of farmers as a food hub, as a traditional food hub. Processing, as everybody probably has heard, and I want to dispel the previous myth. I spent the last 10 years saying that processing capacity isn't really the issue, and I've been proven wrong here in the last couple months. So I'm going to throw that out there. As of February of 2020, our processing booking was down. We sat underbooked, we sat with excess capacity, we sat with worries about being able to staff people throughout our slower season when our bookings are typically down. Vastly different than where we sit today, which is just 2 months later, where capacity seems to be the issue, where we're having challenges meeting the demand by the niche market farmers. So it's a fantastically interesting time to see small farmers gaining the recognition that we've all wanted them to. This community has wanted them to get this recognition now for a long time, and they are. Their neighbors are finally waking up and seeing that they have livestock next door and asking them for meat. So their businesses are thriving, which is what we all desire. And so now we're facing this processing capacity issue with how are we going to get everything through. So we've been looking at this in-house for a while. So as a small processor looking to expand capacity, I think it's important to have real conversations about what that looks like. So as we look to expand capacity, we look to hire. And this brings forth a real conversation about the difference in the processing world that we live in. So large industrial processing establishments, the ones that are struggling to stay open, typically pay, $10 an hour, right? We strive to provide a livable wage, yet historically have had a price ceiling or a problem in that farmers consistently say we're overpriced, right? Overpriced. They don't understand that tracing their livestock through the building like we do as a small niche processor costs a lot of money, because that takes a staff member that's real interested in what we do, which is great culture, just means that we need to be able to pay more. So we need to address the pricing issues that will be an effect of having to or wanting to increase capacity. As we increase capacity, we need to be able to hire staff members at a wage rate that makes sense for them. So that's one thing that we're working on, labor issues. Other things that we can do to help increase capacity is to use a level of mechanization. We are a handcrafted butcher shop, so we're very service oriented, and every order is different that comes through our shop. So we can't mechanize like the large industrial industry can. We also can't do so oftentimes because farmers, the niche farmers, often, in any given day will have a spread of 120 pounds on a hog, from largest to smallest. We'll have guinea hogs come in at 100 pounds and we'll have sow come in at 600 pounds. Maybe I just told you that's more like 400-pound difference. The industry usually sees a spread of about 12 pounds in a given day. Larger processors. So that's one of the challenges of us as small niche processors trying to expand is variation in orders and variation in livestock that we see. And while I am a diehard supporter of heritage breeds, I think there's a good conversation to have there with producers on how we can customize or build efficiencies within our model by doing some systemization, probably a balance there somewhere. And then increasing capacity for processing facility means increased infrastructure. The tech industry does so well because they don't have to own much of anything. Most businesses are told to own very little capital, very little infrastructure, and yet we're in the processing business where the infrastructure needs are so heavy. And so in order to do that, we need to have commitments. And so we've been working on that with producers now for a good 5 years, trying to work with them to project out to the next year so we can build that capacity for the coming years. Very resistant for farmers to want to project out and to build a partnership, a relationship. But I see such great promise right now in that there's conversations being had about 2021 and 2022 now to be looking forward. And that's really what needs to happen in order to build capacity. Any way we go, we've got to know that that capacity is going to be there in a few years, or else we sit on bank loans that go under if that capacity goes away. So those are conversations that are very, very important to have. I will mention that we are a granted organization in that we would not be here today if we did not have federal funding. That got us started. I just was reading the review notes from a grant proposal that we wrote last year. We've been without grant funding for about 5 years now from the federal government. However, I was looking to expand business, and a reviewer wrote, why would we need to support the processing industry if we've already supported you in the past? You should be to the point where you're self-sustaining, and we are. Yet, if we want to expand, that takes profit numbers or federal funding. And so good conversations on who's going to come in and invest in increased processing capacity to raise the bar and get us all to go forward. But I think in anything that we go to, it goes back to a pricing conversation that needs to be had, and whether that be the end consumer, which we all know needs to think about what the true cost of meat is. If they want a traceable meat product, that's very different. That's vastly different than what they might find in a grocery store. And then the farmer, what they're willing to pay for a processing service that's 100% traceable, so that we can provide a labor market to come in and increase our capacity. I was having a conversation with one of our funders from the Kinship Foundation back in, I think it was just January of this year. And I was telling her the story that I don't think that processing capacity is the issue. And then I sat and I thought about it for the last 5 months. And I really think it's a labor issue. It's a inability to pay someone the true cost of what they would need to be willing to slaughter and process livestock, which is a hard physical job that requires a good amount of coordination in this traceable scenario. So I think some of that conversation comes back down to that very concept. As we are looking to hire, we have more capacity here to build if we could find the labor that goes with it. So looking out at the rest of the industry and who else is working in the industry, I wonder if those other processors wouldn't build capacity if they had the right labor to go with it. I feel that they wish not to hire staff because they've been trying to hire the $10 an hour employee that may or may not be dedicated to the mission that we have at hand. And if we were able to increase the labor market, we would also increase capacity. So I think I had 10 minutes, and that's kind of my overall arching, but happy to answer questions and address anything that can be addressed in this one call.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jessica. You really spelled that out super clearly. I really appreciate that. We're going to hold the Q&A specifically just till the end, but for those of you who want to get your question out now, feel free to pop it into the chat box and we'll get to it after we hear from Rebecca and Kelly. So Thanks again, Jessica, and I'll move it over to Rebecca. Do you want to share what's going on in the Niche Meat Processing Assistant Network and a little bit more about what processors around the country are doing to adapt to these challenges as well?
Hi, thank you, Jessica, for sharing your story. What I have to add is not much different than what Jessica has shared. The small processors in our network, which we have hundreds of, are incredibly busy right now, have excess demand, more demand than capacity. But most of them just a couple months ago were in the same situation as Jessica. This time of the year is typically pretty slim, and small processors struggle to keep their workforce on staff. They need, consistent volume throughout the year, and often for small processors, it's just the fall where they get slammed, and then things peter out over the winter as animals are not finished typically that time of the year. So having this incredible demand right now, a lot of small processors are not necessarily scaled up in terms of their workforce to handle that demand. And then, of course, they just have physical constraints of their plants. A lot of folks have been mentioning, why can't they just add a second shift or a Saturday shift? Well, when you have 10 to 15 employees and they're like family, and they have children and wives and husbands, etc., and you want to provide a good quality of life to them, you're not going to really want to work them longer than 40 hours. So small processors are spending a lot of time making sure that their employees are happy and healthy right now, and they are not interested in overworking them and asking them to work overtime or Saturday shifts. And it's also not easy, as Jessica alluded to find additional employees. So, if you wanted to bring in a whole second set of staff to work a second shift, good luck finding those employees. The labor issue is always the number one issue that's brought up in our annual survey to small processors, and that issue is not going away. Some states have taken it upon themselves to create meat cutting apprenticeship programs that are legal and recognized through their state departments of employment, so that they can pay those folks less as they train them, and then also get some tax credits for those apprenticeship programs. I know that Montana has a very active one, and the Northwest states have just started one. So that's sort of a long-term solution. Obviously, that's not something that is going to solve the current bottleneck. Most of the policy, I think Kelly's going to talk to this, but most of the policy suggestions that I've been seeing thrown around, from Prime Act to waiving overtime fees to new grant and loan programs, none of these things are going to solve the existing bottleneck. I hope everyone on this call understands that you can't just flick a switch and create additional capacity. Not only is there the physical plant that, you can't just build a new building. It takes a couple years to get the permits and the funding together, but there's also the lack of skilled meat cutters. And then this demand has to continue. And that's the thing that I may disagree with folks on this call, but I think we're seeing a blip on the screen of demand for small and regional meat processing and small and local farmers. But I think the economic recession or depression that is coming, with over 22 million newly unemployed people and a lot of other people suffering financially, I think that we will see demand slack going into the summer and the next couple of years. So I don't think that small plants can all of a sudden expand capacity just based on this current demand. And I'm sure Jessica can probably agree with me there that it's not like she's going to retool her business based on, you know, April's throughput. I don't think that that's going to be a sustainable demand over the long term. And I think, as we saw in 2008, when consumers became very price sensitive around meat because of the recession, I think that we are going to see a similar situation in our country. And once, you know, the more affordable large-scale meat processors are back online and that meat is back in the grocery store, I think that the majority, I think American consumers are going to probably go back to the more affordable meat simply because they're going to be very price sensitive. So that will mean that our boom in demand is not. In terms of solutions that small processors are doing or trying, it's pretty hard, but I would say some of them are, well, some small processors are helping their farmers with sales, like doing home delivery and adding shipping to their repertoire, because a lot of small processors have lost wholesale markets. Some of them are doing parking lot sales. Some of them are helping to aggregate product from a variety of small producers and then sell under like a single brand. And then I know a lot of processors that are basically trying to divert the very tiny, small scale sort of hobby level and homestead level clients to custom exempt processors. So if a producer does not need retail ready, case ready packaging and labeling and state or USDA inspection, and if they just sell meat by the quarter, half, and whole, they really right now they really should stay out of the USDA plants and stay out of the state inspected plants and seek out custom exempt slaughter and processing, because we need to maintain that capacity at the inspected plants for product that actually has to be inspected. So there still are custom exempt processors that have slaughter slots available. And so I'm trying to, you know, when farmers reach out to me and say, where should I go? If they are very small, I'm talking, you know, less than 10 animals a year and just sell halves and wholes to friends and family, I'm kind of recommending that they go towards custom exempt processing, since that is how they sell their animals anyway. They pre-sell them, pre-sell the live animal. So that's about all I have to say. I'm just going to kind of reserve my time more for questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, you brought up a lot of stuff right there, so I'm looking forward to that Q&A. And that demand, you just don't know if it will be sustained or not. So hopefully we'll, you know, only time will tell, I suppose. The last presenter that we will be hearing from today is Kelly Nuckolls from the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, who's going to speak more about the policy moves that are underway to provide small plants with relief right now. So Kelly, I can share the slides that you sent if you'd like that.
That would be great, thank you.
Sure. All right, let me know when you can see this.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, I always have trouble getting it into presenter mode, so I can try it, but I'm not sure it'll work completely. Okay. Are you still seeing it?
Yes.
Okay.
So just really quickly, a background on INSAC. We're a grassroots alliance of nearly 130 member organizations from around the country, and we take their input and their feedback and their stakeholders' input and feedback and focus on improving federal food and farm policy for over the last 30 years. I will say when it comes to small and very small plants, our main focus over the last 4 years have been USDA roundtables with small and very small plant owners and operators, as well as farmers and ranchers that utilize those facilities, to focus on how to improve, in particular, USDA inspection for those small federally inspected facilities with partners like Rebecca and INPAN. And a lot of the input that we've received around COVID and what's happening in very small and small plants have come from those stakeholders. Next slide. So really quickly, I've seen this happen on a lot of webinars, and it's fun to interact and not just be talked at the whole time. So I'm just curious why you are here, what you've been hearing from your stakeholders. That's really important for me as I go to Congress and ask for certain relief measures to really hear what's happening on the ground. I'm going to pause while folks type into the chat box and also add that the number one feedback I've heard from small and very small plant workers and owners is just a message that, you know, sometimes it doesn't seem like they're always appreciated or thanked as much as other essential workers. And of course, I just want to take the time to thank all essential workers right now. And of course, all of our small and very small plant workers and owners and operators across the country. Next slide. So far we've focused on three main things. That's not to say we haven't had broad discussion on other things, including some other maybe regulatory relief aspects, but the three things that we've heard from both small and very small plant operators, as well as input from Congress on what's realistic right now to include in their relief packages, have been focused on anything that is immediately COVID-related relief. So the two things that have received more support and input right now have been small and very small plant overtime relief. I will say things are moving quickly and change every day now with what Congress is focused on. So this slide is even outdated, and I finished it at 10 a.m. this morning. So right now with the overtime waiver that Rebecca mentioned, we think that this might be included in the next relief package. It has a pretty strong chance. And it would actually be an overtime fee reduction for very small and small plants. So that would increase the number of plants that are able to utilize that fee reduction moving forward. Another thing that several members of Congress are focused on right now is establishing a kind of financial assistance program specifically related to the COVID-19 pandemic and the costs that small and very small plants have seen, as well as any farmers and ranchers, other types of businesses like farmers markets, food hubs, related to their PPE costs, their temperature screening costs, their infrastructure changes that they've had to make to ensure social distancing. And this might be a simplified grant application through USDA if it is included in the next relief package that would provide grants of up to $30,000 for any of these eligible entities. And then the third thing that we've really been focused on, although I will say just realistically, this is a little bit harder right now just because of the focus is on immediate COVID relief and not long-term fixes, but we're always thinking of trying to include long-term fixes. So right now, there's been a lot of discussion around grant programs to help processors, small plants, very small plants, to just help expand their infrastructure, or in areas where it might be needed, even open new small plants. And this is something that I think, as Jessica talked about, the cost can be extremely high. Grant support can help small plants really expand their infrastructure and increase their capacity right now. Kind of on a similar note, I'm sure some folks on this call saw that yesterday the House released their version of the next coronavirus relief package. And there are a few things in there that might apply to small and very small plants, although I can't say that those will be included in the final package, and I don't know how they will be implemented by the administration. But just so everyone knows, a few of those things include a Heroes Grant Fund that would apply to all small, very small, all meat plant workers. That would allow an employer to apply for a grant to provide extra premium pay to workers right now that are on the front lines, including plant workers, up to $10,000 per employee. And there's also some mention of assistance in the USDA Commodity Credit Corporation funds for plants, all plants. So again, there's no like size limits or restrictions in that bill as it currently is written, but these are two things that it might be a possibility that small and very small plants might be able to access right now, especially to just kind of help reduce some of the costs that they're seeing related to the pandemic. Next slide. So I've been asked a lot, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? And unfortunately, I think just telling your story, if you're a farmer or rancher, telling your story as a small plant operator is going to be the biggest thing right now you can do. There's no like immediate action items on the things that I mentioned at the moment, although there might be in the future. So you can keep an eye on any of those action items. I have our website listed here. Right now, our main focus has been around the USDA payments to farmers, making sure that all farmers and ranchers, including farmers and ranchers in this sector, can receive those payments if they have seen a decline in their sales. And so that information is available right now on our website, but there might be in the future some information on the small plant assistance that I just mentioned. And with that, that's all I have. And so I would like to also leave plenty of time for questions.
Great, thank you so much for that, Kelly. It's great to see that there's movement going on at the policy level to help support. And thank you, Jessica and Rebecca, as well. It's really, such a challenge and opportunity to think about what response needs to happen now and then how can we do that long term. So thank you for sharing all your insights and expertise. And I will hand it over to Pete to kick off the Q&A. I know there's been a lot coming through the chat box. So without further ado, go ahead, Pete.
Thanks, Annalena, and thanks to the speakers again. And thanks for all the questions that have come through. It's, as you probably are seeing in the chat, there's quite a lot coming through, and we'll do our best to track those and get through them in the next 20 minutes or so. So we'll just throw it out there. I know all of our speakers have tremendous expertise that crosses through all of these questions. And so I might just kind of point it to one person to start, but other speakers feel free to jump in and add your thoughts and perspectives. One that came up early was curiosity if there was any opportunity to engage workers that were coming from larger plants that might be shut down or might not be the conditions that they want to be working in, and potentially working with those skill sets and those skilled laborers to help with some of the labor shortages that were highlighted. So I thought, Jessica, you might want to take a crack at that question if there was any opportunity to engage that larger labor pool.
So I am hiring. I am one of the plants that would be considering a second shift if we fill it, and if we could get inspection for it. So USDA inspection for a second shift is difficult to come by for us small plants. But forward thinking, we are booked through the beginning of 2021. So where can we increase our capacity? And labor is one of those that I'm actively, that is my full-time job right now, is sorting applications. I'm not seeing applications coming through from those that I expected to see them come through from. So the restaurants have been shut down. I expected to see applications coming through from anybody that had been food service related over the past years of their life. Not seeing them, and haven't seen any come through from the larger industry. Why? Because we're paying a whole lot of unemployment right now. So why look for work if you're being paid to stay at home? That's my theory, not being political about it. So can we convert those employees? We have tried to take employees in the past that have been on like deboning lines at larger hog facilities and not been real successful at converting the labor. Again, we have converted our labor style to, not paying $10 an hour. I did that to start our business for a long time and it never felt good. Now we're, paying a higher labor rate and expecting an employee to come in and care about the work that they're doing, which is mostly traceability. It's not doing the same thing over and over every day. That's what the larger facilities pay somebody to do, is to just debone loins all day long. That's what they do. We expect them to be able to do a variety of work while they break down whole animals. Different labor force needed there. We do train from the ground up, but it takes a certain personality to be somewhat mindfully engaged in the work that we do as far as wanting to support small farmers.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, I heard the point about, inspection, what that takes to get that lined up, and then also hearing that this is similar but not the exact same skill set, and it takes time, just like the infrastructure point, that this is something that isn't built overnight, not necessarily a quick fix, but maybe some potential on the longer term. Another question that came through that seemed common was looking at access to markets. Not just, there was a point around capacity that was made, but also if some of these processors and probably in the producers that they're working with, if they're able to get into some of those other markets that might be a little bit larger, more regional, more national, and if there's limitations there that might also be causing some bottlenecks here. And I'm wondering, Rebecca, if that's something that you might have some perspective on, if it's capacity as well as market access.
Well, I mean, right now, a lot of those kind of regional, mid-scale, and larger markets are closed. Schools are closed. A lot of institutions are closed, colleges. Retail sales are way up, but restaurants are closed for the most part, almost everywhere. So there's been a shift in where people sell meat and where people buy meat. But over the long term, I mean, accessing markets, in my opinion, that's not a role, that's not really a role for government or policy. It's about creating relationships. So, there are more and more small retail chains, like natural grocers and others that are trying to work with more mid-scale processors and mid-scale brands. I think farmers coming together to create regional brands, such as Painted Hills Natural Beef or Grassroots Farmers Cooperative, and other regional brands is a good way to kind of get your foot in the door in some of those mid-scale markets. And some of that could be grant funded through things like LFPP and FMPP programs. But yeah, it's about creating relationships, consistency, reliability, all of those things. So that's all I have to say on that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Kelly, a question has come through for you. As things are moving through on the federal level, and to speak to a point that was made about, those switches that are being flipped and just what lights they're going to turn on and when those lights are going to turn on realistically. There was a question that came through about things that are happening on a state level, and if there's any efforts that you're aware of maybe actions, whether it's policies or program pivots that might be being made on a state-by-state level, or is largely this is kind of something that's happening at the federal level?
I do know there are several states trying to find options to assist right now, including expanding their state inspection to custom plants, trying to re-evaluate the custom exemption and to what edge they can push that. There are other things in regards to just financial assistance as well. I don't have any details on those since we focus specifically on federal policy, but I have heard that there are things happening.
Yeah, and I would like to just add, I just got a message that in Washington state, some county health departments are now allowing custom exempt processors to process for food banks. And that's a decision that can be made at least by county health departments. That's a brand new thing for me. I've never seen that before, but perhaps more states could pursue that to get local meat into food banks, in particular for the hog and chicken barns that are having to be depopulated. That would be a really nice partnership in those states to help divert animals from the compost heap into the local food banks. So just one more thing to add.
Yeah, thanks for that. A question that a couple questions have been getting at a similar question or similar idea, and I'll see if I can kind of pull this together, is specifically around you know, workforce development, or, you know, speaking a little bit about what you're talking about, Jessica. Are there opportunities now that you see that we could be building more of a skilled labor base that could support small and mid-sized processors, programs that already exist that could be, you know, better supported, or new ideas that you have seen or have had yourself to kind of rebuild or, you know, potentially strengthen that skill set that you're talking about needing to hire for?
We partnered with Range Meat Academy maybe a year and a half ago or so, and our butcher apprentices that we do hire on. So when we post of course job postings for butchers. We also post for a butcher apprentice, which is somebody that wants to come in and learn the industry, and that's been somewhat successful, wording it in that fashion to encourage people to go ahead and apply and then come in, and we will train from the ground up. Now that's an online program. The Range program is online, so it may give somebody the ability to understand the cuts of meat, but it doesn't give them the knife skills. So they need to be in-house learning those knife skills with a long-term thought process. So I'd say it takes, in any industry, really, 5 years to become an expert at something, or good at something, not even an expert. And definitely true in our craftsman world that we work in. Takes a good 5 years. So again, I'm going to go back to wage rates, as we need to be able to tell them that there's a significant wage increase over time. And we have been able to do that here, so I don't want to say that that's not happening. We've raised our wage rates, but it's still not what many on this call are probably accustomed to being paid. So, you know, I'm trying to hire somebody that's been in ag industry from NRCS. It's got 10 years in the industry, in the ag industry, no knife skills. He's currently making $55,000 a year. He has no skill set to come in and be a butcher. So now how do I get him converted over and pay him what I need to do so to keep him interested? Those kind of challenges are definitely there.
Great. Thank you for that, Jessica. Kelly, a question that's come up, and I know this is a big can of worms, and I'm sure all of the presenters can speak to it, is around some of the maybe the elephant in the room, which is the power and the consolidation within the larger you know, meat processor and packer world, and some of the things that have been done over the years to consolidate that power, and impacts on labeling and country of origin, and some of the questions that are coming through is around, are there particular opportunities to not just support small and mid-size processors, but to actually take that question back up and look at consolidation within the largest meat processing sector, and try to level the playing field at least a little bit?
Yeah, and that's something we've been pushing for a while now at INSAC. I would say, like, there are a number of members of Congress that are making these asks right now. And I agree that this is what is going to be needed to really help decrease consolidation in the industry, allow for farmers and ranchers to have access to different markets, to different plants and processors. I feel like that's part of the narrative we've been trying to tell right now, that support for small plants, support for additional small plants alone is not going to fix the problem, and we really have to get at the consolidation issue to address what's happening right now. So yeah, I would say that if you are interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to chat on some details and connect you with others at INSAC who are working on that issue.
Thanks, Kelly. Another question that's come up, and Rebecca, I might throw this in your direction. You know, talking about this blip that you mentioned and the demand that's coming from it, the question is, you know, as there's a response to that, and maybe folks dealing with being over capacity, what are the ways that folks can also maintain the labor standards that Jessica so carefully and very well articulated around making sure, you know, we're taking care of labor, taking care of workers, and you mentioned that as well. How can we make sure or support a potential uptick to also maintain labor standards for workers while also maintaining animal welfare? Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share on that?
Well, a couple things that processors are trying is by offering bonuses or increasing wage rates during the pandemic. Unfortunately, kind of the unintended consequence of that is it may encourage employees to come to work when they should be staying home. And so processors sort of have to wrestle with that balance of wanting to incentivize their staff to come in, but also wanting them to stay home if they really need to stay home, if they're feeling sick or have any symptoms or need to care for family members. I will say it's encouraging that for the first time ever in US history, there's actually paid medical leave for all businesses with 50 or more employees for up to 2 weeks, and that is good through the end of the year. So small processors are required to offer up to 2 weeks paid sick leave. Plants that have less than 50 employees are not required to do that, but I know a lot of processors in our network will do it anyways, even if they're not required to. They don't want sick employees coming to work. But they're spending money on PPE. Just by the nature of small plants, people are pretty spread out. So that's not so much an issue. But in terms of the long term, I think it's really important that farmers and organizations understand the incredible pressure that small plants are under. And unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of griping, whining, and complaining about not being able to get their animals in, and anger and outrage by farmers wondering why they have to wait 6 to 12 months. And that kind of inadvertently puts a lot of pressure on small plants to just keep grinding through and keep overworking their employees. And, you know, they have to have time to sanitize better. They have to have time to retool, to fix equipment. Some plants I know are spending, you know, the owners haven't had a day off in 60 days. You know, they are spending their entire weekend fixing equipment, sanitizing. So I just want people to be really aware of the important reciprocal relationship that farmers have with small processors, and how we also need to support those processors in taking time off and taking care of their health and their families. And just not get mad at them, you know, like we're all in this together, as everyone says. And so if a plan is booked up for 6 to 12 months, it just is what it is. Farmers can hold back stock. I know a lot of cattle ranchers that are moving their animals off grain and actually putting them on grass to keep them from fattening so quickly. They can use custom exempt processors. They can seek out-of-state processors. There are some solutions, but complaining and outrage is not a solution.
Thanks for that. Certainly working together is better than working at odds in tough times. And I know, I'm sure, Jessica, you have some thoughts on that as well. And I might tack another question on that we've seen come through. Is there was a question about the potential to, and this has come up in some of the previous questions and responses, is about the potential to also improve existing infrastructure that might be, have fallen behind or not been updated recently. I know that you've dealt with that in terms of rehabbing and quickly trying to get old infrastructure up to scratch. And there was a question about, is that a potential option that might be not short-term, but maybe not as long-term as building from the ground up? So curious if you have any thoughts on that suggestion or idea.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to piggyback on what Rebecca was saying regarding the working together atmosphere that we are thankfully seeing. Actually, our farming community has come through with good attitudes here for the first time in a whole long time. Before this, before March, I would say that the processor and the farmer oftentimes sat on opposite ends of the room when we needed to be working together. For the first time, we have more and more people coming to the table to work together and look long-term, and I think that's real important to do so. So I might add to Rebecca's thoughts on what can be done. Let's look at business planning into 2021 so that we can make some plans and have some confidence in the infrastructure that we're looking at increasing, because of course Rebecca is right in thinking that this might be a blip, and then what do we do after that? So definitely long-term partnerships, relationships, because in the past we would have farmers that would jump for 11 cents. 11 cents difference in pricing, and I'll jump to the guy next door. How can you build capacity with the thought that everybody's going to jump if you charge what it needs to be charged? Second, your question, your actual question there on, oh, now I forget what it is.
About potentially updating existing infrastructure.
Updating, yes. Okay, so my background is that I purchased a 1978 facility after doing a long feasibility plan of building on property. So had a farm operation, was going to build a pork and poultry processing facility only on property. Did a feasibility study, couldn't make it pan out. So had an existing facility close by, could make that work, and then purchased the facility. That facility would not have ever gone under federal inspection under the Chicago district. Wasn't in terrible shape, but it wasn't in shape that would lead to being able to go under federal inspection. Had a fire in year one, on the year anniversary almost after purchasing that facility, which is common in these old facilities. They burn down, they have smokehouses, they have wiring issues, they have lots of refrigeration going on that's old. So we lost that facility, had to rebuild it, and that's what let us go under federal inspection. I see the need for inspection. I know a lot of people are anti inspection, less regulation. I purchased a facility and watched the butcher on day one drop a side of beef on the ground and pick that side of beef up off the ground and go to cut it. He didn't see anything wrong with that. He'd been doing it for the last 10 years. And I said, wait, we got to do something different here. There just wasn't, it was a custom exempt facility, and there was no second set of eyes to be able to say something might need to change here. So I see the need for regulation. Could it be less? For sure. Could we work with small plants differently than large plants? For sure. Can we rehab 1970s facilities? It is certainly expensive. We put about $100,000 into that facility in 1 year before it burned down, trying to get it to state inspection. So that's hard. It's hard.
Thanks for that. And so what I'm hearing is that it's not necessarily an easier option. It is an option, but it comes with its own challenges and definitely something maybe in the toolkit, but not necessarily something that is going to fix all the problems.
I guess can I add one real quick statement? Please. At our facility, we do have more capacity to slaughter than we do process. So we can slaughter about twice as many than we can process. And so we do have some plants calling and asking about setting up processing establishments. That would be a whole lot less cost than the slaughter rate of things makes things very costly. And so if we were to have partnerships where we could be shipping out more primals to even commercial kitchens that are updated, they could be doing processing. And we've been encouraging folks to look at that as an angle to increase capacity.
Thanks for that additional point. I think that's really helpful. A good clarification between slaughter and processing. We have just a few minutes left here, and there's a lot of great questions here, and just would really encourage folks to just take a look at those. There's also just great discussion that's happening there around some questions around, different associations that, operate nationally, and some questions and some responses about different organizations and networks and stuff. Of course, would point everyone towards Rebecca and Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network as one of those at the forefront. Maybe to wrap us up, because we do want to say a few final words about kind of, follow up from this call, I'd like to go through each of the presenters and just ask you for, a quick thought on, for the folks that are on this call that are not deeply involved in the meat processing world, this might be the first time that they're really learning about some of these things or addressing them. Some of the things that were brought up are maybe not necessarily something they're going to work on directly, because it might be around labor issues, or it might be around infrastructure or inspection. I'd like to just get your final thought briefly on what is, one or two things that maybe a general audience can take away from this as an actionable, something that they can do in their communities or with the stakeholders that they work with. So Kelly, I might start with you if you'd be willing to kick us off with that.
Yeah, thank you. I think back to my talk earlier, I would say just thank them if you see them. I keep hearing that a lot. So thank them, and then elevate the stories, not just in your community, but to your member of Congress. Congress is very interested in this topic right now, and they're willing to consider changes they never would have before. So please tell those stories. It's important that we get some realistic solutions out of this. And so I would ask you to reach out to your member of Congress, and if you'd like to learn more, and if you need help doing that, please feel free to email me as well.
Thanks, Kelly. Rebecca, would you mind going next?
Yeah, I would ask that when developing policy proposals, whether at the state level or the federal level, to please invite processors to the table. I continue to see policy ideas being floated around that are largely generated by farmers, and they don't necessarily have the full understanding of the processing world. And a lot of these proposals don't actually solve for the core root cause problems, that may be economic, may be labor issues, may not actually be regulatory in nature at all. So please just make sure processors are at the table helping to develop those policies. They will be much better policies as a result.
Thanks, Rebecca. And last but not least, Jessica.
I piggyback on what Rebecca said is, the solutions are not often as easy, and throughout the last 10 years, I've heard kind of a desire to not understand what goes on behind the front doors or the slaughter doors, and kind of simplify the process that we do on a day-to-day basis. So taking time to understand before proposing a solution, I think is real important. If I could propose a solution, though, going long-term is forward agreements. And so if there are policy individuals or I guess the nonprofit world wanting to do something to make connections and develop forward agreements between farmer and processor that will result in the ability to gain financing through confidence that business is going to stay.
Thanks, Jessica. And thanks to all the presenters. We are at the top of the hour and we could keep going for hours and hours on this, and we should. It's a great topic and a lot of great questions. So thank you to each of the presenters. It was invaluable. Your time is precious and we certainly appreciate that, as is the time of everyone on this call. So hopefully it did create value for you. The Wallace Center definitely supports this conversation to continue, and we will through the listserv primarily. For this call, it was recorded. We are going to make sure it gets posted in the next day, and we will follow up with you via email with that link. And we also have been taking some notes, and we'll make sure that we make those accessible as well. And we'll capture the stuff that was in the chat boxes so we don't lose that rich knowledge that was there. But want to thank you each for your time and for your interest in this subject and your work on this particular and important topic. And we'll all stay in touch in the days and weeks to come as we work together on some of these solutions. So thanks for your time and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.